I'm Simon Kent and I'm filling in for Brian Lilly. Fighting for democracy, that is the topic of tonight's byline. Now let's start with a joke. Not an Irish one, even if it is St Patrick's Day. Did you hear the one about the Crimean referendum on the weekend? Well, it was supposed to decide the future of that disputed piece of the Ukraine. The result was never in doubt, but the joke, sadly, was on the rest of the global community because nobody's able or willing to do anything about the outcome that splits a sizable chunk off the Ukraine and delivers it wrapped in a nice little bow to Russia. Isn't that cute? No challenge, no disputation, no real penalty. Look away, nothing to be seen here. Of course, there have been warnings about the illegitimacy of a rushed poll that was never ever in doubt. Barack Obama warned, John Kerry warned, the UN Security Council met and, well, they found it hard to agree on anything, let alone issue a warning. Just listen as President Obama puts on his sternest face and spoke yet again today about the consequences and actions that might follow the fracturing of the Ukraine.
As an initial step, I'm authorizing sanctions on Russian officials, entities operating in the arms sector in Russia, and individuals who provide material support to senior officials of the Russian government. And if Russia continues to interfere in Ukraine, we stand ready to impose further sanctions.
If all that bluster sounded a bit familiar, then it should. Almost the same words and phrasing were used by US Secretary of State John Kerry about Syria's stockpile of chemical weapons just over 12 months ago. Nothing happened much then either. Just as nothing much will happen now, aside from a few vague threats of sanctions against Russian oligarchs and suspension of their holiday shopping privileges in Monaco. Before we leave Syria behind, just quickly, did you know that this weekend marks the 3rd anniversary of the start of that bloody awful conflict? If you didn't, then you wouldn't be alone because the killing goes on while the rest of the world is gripped by some sort of postmodern inertia. Now, one could hardly figure who could be called one man who couldn't be called inert is Vladimir Putin. He has again schooled Barack Obama on how to be a master geopolitical strategist. First off, you just get what you want, in this case the Crimea, and then ignore the rest of the world. That hard scrabble approach has delivered this. Crimeans voted overwhelmingly in favour of the split in a poll that the United States, the European Union and all others say violates the Ukrainian constitution and international law and took place under duress of Russian military intervention. Russian President Vladimir Putin tried to keep a straight face as he maintained that the vote was legal. It was consistent with the right of self-determination, according to his Kremlin spokesman. Yeah, right. Talk about laugh. Imagine Western democracies getting schooled, getting told how to conduct a clear, open, fair and transparent election from a man like Vladimir Putin. No mention of the fact that he'd already stationed troops on the streets of Sevastopol and massed plenty of troops and equipment along the Russian border just to make sure that everyone knew, as if they didn't know already, who was supposed to win. Russia. We saw Vladimir Putin thumbing his nose at world opinion while the president of the most powerful nation on earth was left slowly opening and closing his mouth like a little sleepy goldfish. Just once you'd love Obama to take his role seriously. Where is his John F. Kennedy moment of standing alongside the people of Berlin and claiming to be one of them, to be alongside them? How could anyone forget his stunning piece of rhetoric from 1963 when the memorable Ich bin ein Berliner, which translated fairly simply from the German means I am a Berliner.
In the world of freedom, the proudest boast is Ich bin ein Berliner.
That was good stuff. Well, Ronald Reagan, he made a taunt of Mikhail Gorbachev in 1987. Remember when Reagan stood at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin and by using just 4 simple words was able to set in motion the end of the Cold War and the old USSR?
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Now, both Kennedy and Reagan were giants on the world stage, even though they came from vastly different political ends of the political spectrum. But they knew the essential importance of speaking up for the oppressed and for supporting real democracy. Both Kennedy and Reagan also keenly felt aware of how a country as powerful as the US had to be received. In 2014, we have neither. The world witnesses Barack Obama making threat after threat against the likes of Syria, Russia and the perpetrators of the Benghazi embassy horror. Then after he makes these threats, notice he always leaves the stage without taking any questions. He just walks out of the White House. See you later. Out of the room. The reason is obvious. He has no answers, no solutions. Just the vainest of hopes that somebody somewhere is taking notice of the former Chicago community worker and his entreaty of, why can't we all get along? Why indeed? It kind of makes you look back with mild fondness for US President Jimmy Carter. Remember him? At the moment, he's making President Barack Obama look like a 97-pound weakling and a man whose legacy in office will be defined only by all the world leaders who ignored him. And that's the byline.
It's my strong belief that we must keep the pressure on, and we must continue to maintain sanctions and maintain putting in place strong steps to dissuade this behavior.
And that was the Prime Minister early today. Tonight's top story, Crimea result, referendum, fact or fiction. The so-called referendum, this is what the Prime Minister's department said, held today was conducted with Crimea under illegal military occupation. Its results are a reflection of nothing more than Russian military control. This referendum is therefore illegitimate. It has no legal effect, and we do not recognise its outcome. Now we're going to speak to J.D. Gordon. He's a former Pentagon spokesman. He's going to join us from Washington. He's also going to tell us about some of these results, 96.7% to 3.3%, the turnout of 83%. I mean, they're incredible figures, J.D. Gordon. What do you make of this outcome?
Hey, Simon, thanks for having me on the show.
Okay.
Well, I think it's a total sham.
Yeah.
I think it's a total sham. I think that Russia's very strong. Vladimir Putin's very strong. He's going to do whatever he wants. I think he's basically just annexed Crimea. The referendum was supposed to give it some legitimacy, but any vote that's going to be 97% in favor, it doesn't make any sense to me. So I think it's a complete sham, and it's just Putin's attempt to gain legitimacy.
But it really is strange credulity. I mean, don't the Russians see that when this figure goes out to the rest of the world, that the 3% who didn't vote yes, that's actually within the margin of error. So they're basically saying every single person who voted yes. I mean, is that believable or not?
You know, it's almost hard to figure out why they even went through the process of having a referendum if they're going to say those are the results. I mean, because it looks so laughable. I think what Vladimir Putin is trying to do is reconstitute a greater Russia. He invaded Georgia in 2008. He still has two provinces, Ossetia, South Ossetia, and Abkhazia. They're still under Russian control in Georgia. He's taken over Crimea, population of 2 million people. I think that he's looking at taking over parts of eastern Ukraine as well, because most of the people there are native Russian speakers. And if I was in places like the Baltic states, like Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, I'd be very nervous right now.
Yeah, I think Obama too, early today, he had his own press conference and he had a few words to say on this again, but he does always come across as a man who's all talk and no action.
Right, and I think Putin knows that. I think those red lines for Syria said it all to Putin, that when President Obama says something, he's not going to be able to carry it out. Either he's going to lack the will to do it or the Congress isn't going to let him. So basically, I think Vladimir Putin sees it as a blank check. The other thing is the EU is in a relatively weak position to confront Russia as well. They get 40% of their natural gas from Russia, and Russia is a bully when it comes to natural gas and oil, because they're the world's top exporter, right? And so whenever the going gets tough, they'll cut off their neighbors. They've cut off Ukraine before. They've cut off Belarus before. Right, they'll cut them off.
Everyone's looking weak here. I mean, look at Obama's press conference, and he was talking about the international community is going to get together, they're going to hurt, they're going to push back. No, they're not. All anyone is doing is talking.
Well, there's a little bit more than talk. There are some sanctions. The White House just announced sanctions against 7 Russian top officials, 4 Ukrainian top officials. But you know what they really ought to do, Simon? They ought to get tough. They ought to get tough, and perhaps President Obama should withdraw from the START treaty. That would send a message to Vladimir Putin. The START treaty, the new START treaty for the United States, was a terrible outcome to begin with. You know, we have a disadvantage from 10 to 1 in tactical or nuclear weapons because of that new START treaty. We ought to walk away from that. The other thing is, Vladimir Putin needs to understand that he should not invade other countries. That is against international law. It's against everything we stand for in the West, in the United Nations. We should be doing military exercises with the Baltic states, with countries in the Black Sea. I know that the Navy has 1 destroyer they're working with in the Black Sea with Romania and Bulgaria, but 1 destroyer just isn't enough.
But JD, the way I'm listening to you talk here, you make eminent sense. Where is the lack of sense in the White House? Why does Obama seem so detached and so eager to be everyone's friend rather than just stand up for democracy, stand up for the Ukrainian people?
You know, that's a great question, Simon. I think President Obama's worldview is that the United States should just be one of 193 countries in the UN, no more powerful than anybody else. So if we're no more powerful than anybody else, we don't have any more influence than anybody else. I think that he sees the United States, frankly, as a bully, and I don't agree with that view. I think the United States and Canada, countries like ours, have helped the global freedom agenda. That's why we had the Cold War, to stand up to communism, to stand up to dictators, to stand up to totalitarianism. We're not doing that anymore.
And
President
JD,
Obama's weak, and Vladimir Putin knows it.
And you're in Washington. What's the feeling there in Washington? We have to be pretty quick here. We're going to wrap up. But how can you sum up the feeling in Washington at the moment about Obama and the Crimea?
There was just a poll that came out in the United States that showed that Vladimir Putin is perceived as a very strong leader and Barack Obama is a very weak leader. So I think that everybody in this country, or most people in this country, realize Vladimir Putin's going to walk all over anybody he can because he's strong and he can do it, and nobody's going to take him on with the force to do it.
Because whenever he says something, he does it, which is the opposite of of the current Obama administration.
Yes, that's right, Simon. It's true. It's sad but true.
Okay, look, thank you for joining us. J.D. Gordon, you're there in Washington. Thanks for bringing us up to speed on what's happening in Washington.